In the heart of the untamed Wild West, a lone rancher crosses paths with a mysterious woman on the run, leading to a night that changes everything. A story of courage, secrets, and redemption awaits. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Where are you watching from? Let's get started. Plains painting the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. The dry wind carried with it the faint scent of sagebrush and dust as Ethan Cole leaned against the weathered fence, wiping the sweat from his brow. Life as a rancher was quiet, predictable, and exactly what he needed after years of gunfire and bloodshed. He'd traded the weight of a revolver for the weight of responsibility. Cattle, fences, and silence. It had been months since he'd heard a gunshot, and he intended to keep it that way. The wind howled, a coyote cried somewhere far off, and Ethan thought he'd finally found peace. That peace shattered when he heard the distant thunder of hooves. He straightened, his eyes narrowing toward the western ridge. Few people rode that trail. It led to nowhere but trouble. His dog Rust began to growl, low and uneasy. Ethan's hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning by the barn door. The sound grew louder, frantic, uneven. A lone rider burst into view, dust swirling around the horse's legs like smoke. The rider, a woman, was slumped forward, barely holding on. When she reached the ranch gate, the horse stumbled to a halt and she slid from the saddle, hitting the ground hard. Ethan dropped his hat and rushed forward. She looked up, her face streaked with dust and fear. "Please!" she gasped, her voice trembling. "They're coming!" Her dress was torn, her hands scraped raw. She tried to stand but faltered, clutching her side. Ethan caught her before she fell. "Easy," he said, his voice steady but tense. "Who's coming?" She looked over her shoulder, eyes wide with terror. "Men," she whispered, "bandits." "They killed my brother. They'll kill me too." Ethan's expression hardened. Without another word, he half lifted her, guiding her toward the barn. Inside, he bolted the heavy doors and blew out the lantern. The air was thick with the smell of hay and leather. Outside, the wind carried the distant echo of approaching riders. "Stay quiet," he said, keeping his voice low. She nodded, trembling. In the faint moonlight seeping through the cracks in the wood, Ethan could see her more clearly now. Maybe 20 years old, her dark hair tangled, her brown eyes full of fear and exhaustion. "What's your name?" he whispered. "Clara," she said softly. "Clara Grayson," he nodded. "All right, Clara, you're safe here." She looked around the barn, her breathing shallow. "They saw me ride this way," she said, shaking her head. "You don't understand. They'll search every inch of this place." Ethan peered through a small gap between the boards. Dust clouds moved closer. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you," he said, chambering a round into his rifle. Moments later, 4 riders appeared, their silhouettes cutting against the fading light. They were rough men, guns on their hips, cruel smirks on their faces. One of them shouted, "Hey, rancher! We saw a woman ride this way." "You seen her?" Ethan stepped out of the barn, calm but ready. "Ain't seen no one," he said evenly. The man squinted, then grinned. "Mind if we take a look around?" Ethan tilted his head slightly. "I mind a lot." His voice carried the quiet threat of someone who'd seen too many fights. The bandit's grin faltered. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the man spat into the dust and said, "Suit yourself, but if you're lying, we'll be back." They turned their horses and rode off, their laughter echoing as they disappeared into the distance. Ethan stood there until the sound faded completely. When he returned to the barn, Clara was standing near the hayloft, clutching her dress. Her eyes were wide, disbelief and relief mixing in one shaky breath. "You could have been killed," she whispered. He shrugged, setting his rifle down. "Wouldn't be the first time." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Why did you help me?" He hesitated, the question cutting deeper than she knew. "Because once," he said quietly, "someone helped me." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with things neither of them could say. Finally, she looked down. "They won't stop. They'll come again. I don't want you to die because of me." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then we'll be ready for them." She shook her head, tears glinting in the lantern light. "You don't understand. If they find me, I'll take it off. Just do it, Ethan froze. Take what off? He asked slowly. Clara swallowed hard. My disguise, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not just a runaway. I'm carrying government papers, information that could stop those men. If they catch me, they'll torture me for it. The weight of her words hit him like a hammer. You're carrying federal secrets? He said. She nodded. My brother was a courier. They ambushed us. He didn't make it. Her voice broke, but she steadied herself. I have to get these papers to the marshal in Cheyenne. Ethan stared at her, torn between disbelief and respect. You came through this land alone? She nodded. I didn't have a choice. For a long moment he said nothing, just stared at the barn door, thinking of the men who would return by dawn. He'd sworn never to draw a gun again, but some things didn't stay buried forever. Finally, he turned back to her, his voice low but firm. You'll get to Cheyenne, he said. I'll see to that. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. Why would you risk your life for me? Ethan gave a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Because maybe it's time I stop running from mine. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the barn doors as the first stars appeared above the darkening plains. Inside, a wounded girl and a haunted man waited in silence. Both strangers, both broken, but bound by the danger closing in around them. Neither of them knew it yet, but by morning, their lives would be forever changed. Of morning that bit at the skin and carried the promise of trouble. The sun crept slowly over the plains, turning the frost on the grass into silver fire. Ethan Cole stepped out of the barn with his rifle slung over his shoulder, his mind already working through the hours ahead. He'd barely slept, haunted by Clara's words from the night before. Government papers. Murdered brother! Bandits who wouldn't quit. He had lived a life running from chaos, but now it had come knocking at his door once again. Inside, Clara was feeding the horse, her hands trembling as she worked, though she tried to hide it. She had changed into one of Ethan's sister's old dresses, and though it was simple, it made her look almost unrecognizable from the desperate fugitive who'd arrived last night. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching her silently. For a moment, he saw someone else, a shadow of his past, a memory of another young woman he'd once failed to protect. He cleared his throat and said quietly, We'll leave at dawn. The sheriff in Dry Creek's a good man. He can get you safe to Cheyenne. Clara paused, her hand resting on the horse's neck. And what about you? She asked. Once you hand me over, what then? Ethan looked at her, the corners of his mouth tightening. Then I go back to being a rancher. She gave a faint, almost sad smile. You don't believe that. He didn't answer. Instead, he began checking his rifle, counting the bullets. She was right, he didn't believe it. A man like him didn't get to just walk away from the past. Not for long. They were nearly ready to ride when the sound came again, the distant echo of hooves. Ethan stiffened, his hand moving automatically to his gun. Clara's face drained of color. They're here, she whispered. Ethan moved quickly, scanning the horizon. Dust rose from the ridgeline, 5 riders this time moving fast and hard. Get inside, he said firmly. Clara shook her head. No, we can make it if we leave now. He turned to her, his tone sharp. We won't outrun them. We fight. There was no time to argue. He tossed her a revolver and pointed toward the hay cart. Stay low, and if anyone comes near you, shoot. She hesitated, her hands shaking, but took the gun. The next moment, gunfire cracked through the morning air. Ethan dropped behind a trough, returning fire with deadly precision. Years of muscle memory guided his movements. He hit one rider clean through the shoulder. Another veered off, screaming. Clara crouched low, her heart pounding so loud she could barely think. The world became noise, bullets hitting wood, horses screaming, Ethan shouting orders between shots. Then came the blast. Ethan grabbed a stick of dynamite from the storage chest, lit it with his match, and threw it toward the corral. The explosion tore through the silence, scattering men and horses alike. Smoke and dirt filled the air. Clara coughed, covering her mouth. Ethan! She screamed, running toward the sound. He was crouched by the fence, his arm bleeding, the sleeve dark with blood. You're hurt, she cried. He gave her a grim smile. Just a scratch. She tore a strip from her skirt and pressed it against his wound. Her hands were gentle but firm, her face pale with worry. "Why do you keep doing this for me?" she asked. He met her eyes, and for a second the battle faded away. "Because I can't stand by and let evil win. Not again." His voice broke slightly at the end, as if haunted by memories she couldn't see. Clara swallowed hard and nodded. "Then let's finish this." The remaining bandits regrouped near the ridge, uncertain and shaken. Ethan fired one last warning shot into the dirt, his voice carrying across the plain. "You tell your boss this land's not for the taking. If he wants her, he'll have to come himself." The men hesitated, then turned their horses and rode off. Silence fell. Only the wind and the distant echo of their retreat remained. Clara exhaled shakily, her hands still trembling. "They'll come back," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "Not if we're gone by sundown." That night, under a sky filled with stars, they rode east. The plains stretched endlessly before them, quiet, cold, and free. They didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say. When they reached the telegraph station hours later, Clara slid off her horse, her legs weak from exhaustion. Inside the small wooden building, she handed the coded papers to the telegraph clerk and dictated a message meant for the federal marshal in Cheyenne. Her voice was steady, almost defiant. When it was done, she turned to Ethan. "It's over," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "The message is sent." Ethan removed his hat, looking at her with tired eyes. "You did good," he said quietly. She studied him for a long moment. "You could come with me," she offered. "You don't have to go back to that lonely ranch." He looked down, a small smile crossing his face. "Some men are meant to be alone." She shook her head. "No, you just think you are." But before she could say more, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're safe now, Clara. That's all that matters." The next morning, when she woke, he was gone. Her horse was saddled and ready, and pinned to the saddle was a folded note written in rough handwriting. "Keep riding, Clara. The world needs people like you. Don't look back." She stared at it for a long time, tears stinging her eyes. She looked toward the horizon, where the sun was rising over the open plains, and whispered, "Thank you, Ethan." Somewhere out there, the rancher rode on, alone, free, and forever changed. The man who had once run from his past had finally found a reason to stand and fight again. And though the West would forget his name, the woman he saved never would.